All right, group. Today on the Second Chance podcast, we're joined by John Fella, a ministry relations manager at Joni and Friends Chicago, a passionate advocate for families navigating disabilities, and a dedicated father to his son, Christopher. John's journey is one of resilience, transformation, overcoming personal and professional challenges to embrace his calling as a mentor, speaker, and community builder. From the struggles of nearly losing his home to finding hope and purpose through faith and intentional community, John's story is a powerful reminder that support and connection can turn even the darkest times into opportunities for growth. I'm excited to meet you, my man. Appreciate you joining me today.
Absolutely, Jeff. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's easy to jump into this second chance moment with you, and you shared with me that you're as a young father of a child with autism, you faced a profound crisis in your life. Can you walk us through that pivotal moment when you decided to redefine your value as a husband and father?
Absolutely, and that really is the core of who I am in terms of how I identify. Because I always start out conversations like this by saying that at the end of the day, first and foremost, I'm a dad, and I'm a
Yeah.
dad of a child with a disability with autism. And it's actually just a special shout out. It's actually his 17th birthday today, so shout
Yeah,
out to him
awesome.
for
Happy
that.
birthday.
So there you go, Chris. You won't be listening live, but we'll have you listen to it after. But
Yeah.
anyway, um, you know, what I struggled with early on was, I think, what a lot of parents struggle with, moms or dads, when disability, kind of comes into the picture. My wife and I, his mom, my wife at the time, we were young parents. Both of us had a background in teaching, but it was our first child, and we had no, experience of any of this. And then when it was about, his 18-month checkup, and we walk through things with the pediatrician and figure out there might be something wrong, and then one thing leads to another and snowballs, and then before you know it, you're doing a world of therapy, you're doing a world of doctor's appointments, of figuring out what's the best school option, trying school options that don't work, and sometimes not well at all. It's challenging. And one thing that I've found with a lot of families and with a lot of parents that I've worked with around the country is that usually the way that a mom would respond to, disability showing up, is that the mom jumps right in and figures out, what do we need? Who do we need to talk to? Where are the doctors? What's insurance going to cover? What is the best school option, and all those things. And that very much was the case for my son's mom, and she still is a great mom to this day. So she was great about handling all the details, about jumping right in and figuring out where he needed to be, and those best choices. But then I needed to figure out who I was, right? Who I was in the family now, and how I identified, because she was over all the detailed stuff, and she was great at it, and very type A, and it was kind of like, this is my world, let me do my thing, which was fine. But many times dads, in my case, what they do is they throw themselves into their work, meaning, I'm going to throw myself into my career, I'm going to work very hard, make sure we have enough money to cover all these new things, and that's really my part. And I've met many great dads, believe me, met many great dads, and great dads that I'm in a relationship with, who are they're very much involved in their child's life, and do a lot of stuff, and contribute in many ways. But for many dads, it really is, let me work extra hard to cover these things. My problem was, I was never the breadwinner in our family. My wife, his mom, always made more money than me. So if I didn't make all the money, and if I wasn't doing all these other things, what did I do? Right. And then lo and behold, we get into a season of life where, as a lot of families of disability start to find out, because when you put a child with a disability in a family, and this is one of the reasons why the divorce rate is so high, and I'm not going to quote an exact number because that changes all the time, but it's still exponentially higher than the average divorce rate. The reality is that when you put disability in there, everything gets squeezed. So if you've got problems, those problems now are magnified. So for us, we went through a season where all of a sudden nothing was working. Our marriage was failing. I had a job loss, so we really were in some tough financial straits. We almost lost our home. We almost separated. We didn't separate, but we almost got there. And of course, I'm feeling like a failure. So I had to figure out, first of all, again, in light of all these things, who was I as a man? Who was I as a father? Who was I as a husband? And it really caused me to experience that man in the mirror moment, so to speak, and say, you know what? I know I have value. I know I have worth. What is that? And so then that next part of the story was me going on that journey to find that stuff. And I certainly did figure it out all by myself. But the things that I learned now, I also believe in giving back to folks that I encounter, that I experience, people I meet, because if it wasn't for the help that I had, there's no way that I would be here. As I like to say, I wouldn't be here on this podcast. I don't know where I would be, quite honestly. So yeah, I'm thankful to God for being led by good people who showed me that I did have value, what that value was, and then I was able to turn it around and help others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your strength in that. Did you find yourself, and just one question I had, I grew up around, in my younger years, I was around guys that just didn't want to go home because they really didn't know how to be a dad. They would use work as that crutch, but they were struggling just to figure out how to be a dad. But was you experiencing any of that as well, or you're just like, I need to work to help offset our income?
The funny thing is that I love spending time with my son. I really, really did. And in many ways, I think one of the early things that I could give into the marriage, into the family, was being there with my son and for my son. I never had a problem spending time around my son. Didn't mean it wasn't challenging sometimes, because
Yeah.
he could be a fussy guy, and sometimes you'd be pulling your hair out because of this or that. But you know what? There were so many memories that I have to this day, and I can even look at all the old photographs of his mom actually took on a second job on the weekends, kind of thing, to supplement some income. So most of the time I had him on my own. And I would take him and we would hang out and we'd go to different parks and playgrounds and this place and whatever. And it was just that experience of him hanging out with dad. And you know what? I loved it. I got a crash course on what it was to be a dad real quick, because it's obviously taking care of a young child,
Yeah.
but also when they've got extra needs, you have to kind of figure out, okay, what works, what doesn't, how does this go, kind of thing. So that wasn't the problem for me in terms of
Good.
spending time around my son. In my marriage and relationship, that was a little different, because that's where a lot of the guilt and the shame came up, and it was just a lot of friction, between his mom and I,
Pick
early on.
guilt and shame. Tell me about that.
Well, as I kind of explained, if you look at what our culture tells us, okay, so what is a man? Well, one of the expectations in as the husband in a married situation is you're the provider. Now, is that the case for everybody? No, of course not. And in many cases, women have great careers, moms have great careers, and sometimes do make more. And I've certainly met a lot of guys that are in that boat. But the problem for me was, if she was handling all of this other stuff for my son, and I didn't do that, because that was the one thing I saw a lot of guys doing, and then on top of it, I also saw that I was kind of getting lost in okay, what did I actually provide? Because sure, I spent time with my son,
Mm.
and anybody
Yeah.
could see that I was a great dad with him. But it was also easy, with the amount of stress that we were having on so many levels. Okay, well, you're spending time with your son, but so what? You're supposed to do that anyway. What are you really doing to help here? And again, because my his mom, again, my wife at the time, was so great with being on top of everything else. It was almost like, dude, okay, what do I need you for? And whether she was literally saying that or not, that's what I was feeling. And then, of course, you throw in the fact that we didn't have a lot of family help. We actually had a lot of help specifically from her mom, my mother-in-law. And I know naturally sometimes that's a whole Hatfield McCoy type of a thing with the husband and the mother-in-law. And now, for the most part, we had a good relationship. However, that was also an extra layer for me, because here's the mom stepping in, whether it's she's providing things in terms of putting money to something, or taking care of us in some other way. Okay, then that's something else I'm also not doing. So when you all roll it up, it's who was I? What did I actually contribute? If I walked out the door, literally, and when I say that, I'm usually pretty transparent about this piece too. Um, at my lowest point, I did sit down in front of a computer one day and write 3 letters. One was to my mother, one was to my son, and one was to my wife at the time. All of them were suicide notes. Obviously, I didn't do anything. But the reality is that I felt then that if I walked out the door, literally or figuratively, if I just checked out, the other way, would anybody really miss me? Now again, would people miss me? Sure, but again, you carry that guilt and shame of, is life just going to go on? Well, you know what? That's tough. It's really bad that he's gone or he's not here, but whatever, we'll go on. That's what I was internalizing, and that's what I had to rectify, because at the end of the day, I also knew that I was the only one who could really sort that out for myself. It wasn't about anybody else doing it for me. Certainly getting support, and I'm big on support and I'm big on community, as we'll talk about. But it was
Yeah.
up to me to kind of step up and work through that.
So that's where it kind of takes you through your faith, but you're able to surround yourself within your church community, and that was something that you were able um, to really go probably deep dive in with it with your church community and your church groups. How did your church community and your men's groups how did they how did they help you during those times through that advice that you kind of give now?
Yeah. So one of the stories that I like to tell in my talks and presentations is something called the Tale of Two Parking Lots.
Mm,
And I call it that because it happened in parking lots. So the first part of the story was during the season of life I'm describing now. We attended a church at the time, and they used to have a men's group that would meet on a Friday night. And it was during the summer, and I'm sitting in my car because I got there early, so I'm killing some time. And I decided to make a couple phone calls. Now, mind you, I'm right in the middle, right in the thick of everything I just kind of described with what was going on in our marriage. So I called a couple of my oldest friends. One was my best friend from high school, the other my roommate from college. I lay out exactly what's been going on for me. Both of them are married, no kids. They're hearing all this. They're overwhelmed. They don't know what to do for me. They're like, one of my friends actually said, "Man, if it were me, I'd just walk." And I'm like, "Well, I don't think I can do that." And he's like, "All right, well, but we're here for you. Just kind of let us know how it's going." I go into the meeting at the church. Now, mind you, most of these guys were probably 20 or my senior. I was in my late 30s at the time. So most of these guys are 50, 60, 70. And I'm thinking I'm going to get some sage advice or wisdom. And so they knew some of what I was going through, but not everything. So that night, I just kind of laid it all out there. And there was kind of a stunned silence. And after about 30 seconds of that, the group leader chimed in and said, "Well, we're sorry to hear that. And that's really tough. But what you need to know is that it's going to be okay." Now, here's the thing. That's not what I needed to hear in that moment.
yeah. Mm-mm.
I mean, and in the grand sense, do I know it's going to be okay? Yeah, of course I do. But that's not what I needed then. I needed guys to come around me. I needed guys to say, "Hey, listen, if you need something, I'll talk to you. Can we help you somehow?" And all that kind of thing. So what I realized in that moment was I had no community. I maybe had some people that cared about me, whether they were family or friends or whatever, but they really didn't get what was going on. So for me, what I started out with was, one, I'm like, I got to get me some community. Now, I will say that for a couple of different reasons, we wound up transitioning from that church and going to another one. But early on, and mind you, I was not a person of faith. When my son was born, I was not a Christian yet. I actually got saved because of a different men's Bible study that I became a part of. And my family and I started going to church regularly, and we got involved in community. And for me, early on, what I like to talk about in terms of community is that my early church experience at that time really did a lot for me. One, because I found out what my true identity was, and my identity was through my relationship with Christ, number one. But number two, it was also that I had value as a man, regardless of what my checkbook said, or regardless of any other thing that maybe I brought to the table. My value was just in who I was showing up. And so that kind of allowed me to reboot. And then as I got more involved in church, life, and again, getting specifically involved with men's ministry, being involved in men's retreats, men's events, and then also helping out with the life of the church in some other ways. I learned what real community was and looked like. And regardless of whether somebody had a kid with a disability like mine or not, they could still talk to me. And so a lot of these skills and tools that I now use when I do advocacy with families of disability are things that I really just learned from those early experiences. And they weren't all, you know, specific to, whether I was working with a family with a disability or not, or parents who walked that walk. They knew what crisis was. They knew what it was to struggle, and they could still relate to me. And so once then I got on that firm footing and that foundation was set, then I could start to see, okay, this is who I am. This is what my value is. And now how can I build on this, and where can I go from here?
Man, that's I think we overlook that community support a lot, and you try to suffer in silence and figure it out on your own. And I think it's a component that a lot of folks overlook. There's what years this so we're talking 17 years ago, so oh, 09, 08, 07 is where we kind of are when he's born.
So he was born in '07,
Yeah.
and then kind of this uh, pressure cooker time, as I call it, of life happened about 2011, 2012. So when he was about 4 or 5. So yeah.
And that puts you in that situation. We touched on these things too about just your financial struggles, marriage challenge, job loss, just setback after setback. Where does you got your network, but where does this ability to maintain hope? Where does that come from? And your ability to just keep resilience and keep on keeping on. But I like to use that word hope. Where does that come from for you? How did you find that throughout all of these things that you're dealing with?
Well, whenever I give advice, or people say, "What's your best advice?" So I put my former teacher hat on, and I say, advice for me is number one, little A, number one, little B. Number one, little A for me is my Christian faith. When I came to Christ, when I was able to surrender my life in that way, that really shifted everything, because then I understood that it wasn't about me. It was about what he could do through me and wanted to do through me. But I had to allow him to kind of take the wheel, as I sometimes talk about it. Faith is one of these things where, it really, it's like a muscle, right? So sometimes you have to know when to, put your foot on the gas a little bit and work it. Sometimes you need to know when to take your hands off the wheel and say, okay, I don't got this, but you do. That type of a thing. So when I was in a healthy environment with guys who really did care about me and kind of lived their faith, that's what really kind of showed me that, hey, listen, this is what my value is, kind of thing. And I can walk through the door at home, and you know what? Some other things might not be going too well, but I still have that inside of me that now I'm bringing in and carrying with me. And once my wife at the time started to see that, I mean, literally, the first night that I came back from this Bible study where, I personally was saved, she said, "Wow, you're different." And I'm like, "Yeah, I think I am." So that really was it for me. Now, because I talk to a lot of different people, and I talk to a lot of non-religious folks and non-Christians, and if you're hearing this and you're one of them, that's fine. But I always go back to my number one B advice, which is community. You might not be religious or spiritual, but you got to have community. And for me, it was learning what it was to be in true relationships with people, and seeing how you lean in and you build into the life of someone else. Because then what it taught me was, okay, um, life is hard. That's the other big fallacy I think that was broken for me, and quite honestly for my wife at the time too. Everybody starts out being married. You have this idyllic view of, we're going to get married, have the big house and great jobs, and everything's going to be fine. Kids are healthy, no problems, and then life punches you in the face. It's like that. Another great piece of advice that I heard, and I think it came from the legendary philosopher Muhammad Ali, or no, sorry, Mike Tyson.
Mike
Mike
Tyson.
Tyson. It came from Tyson. When somebody said, well, this guy that you just knocked out in 30 seconds, he said he had a plan for you of how he was going to fight you, how he was going to beat you. He said, yeah, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And
Yeah.
it's true. We all got a plan. When you get punched in the face, how do you respond? So for me, it was now, okay, I got punched in the face several times and probably a few body shots too. Okay, now I'm back up. And now I kind of have my wits about me. Okay, now I know that a lot of this stuff I've been hearing, a lot of the stuff I've been feeling and believing is not real. Okay, I know what is real. Now I'm going to be in relationship with other people, guys, parents, etc., families that are on that same wavelength. But then the next step was, okay, I also need to give back, and that was the thing that also really hit me several years after I kind of went through this rebuilding process. Was, okay, as it was done to me, now go do for someone else, because that is a very necessary part of that process. Because on the one hand, I was able to use the things that I learned from my own experience and help someone else. And at the same time, those are folks in many ways. And I say this all the time because, for folks who don't have special needs kids or kids with disability, they might say, wouldn't you wish that your kid didn't have this? And I would say, you know what? I probably would, but here's the thing. My child having a disability, there have been so many blessings I never would have expected. And one of those is the fact that I've met so many wonderful people, so many great parents, families. I've been involved with so many great organizations. None of this would have ever happened. My child didn't have a disability. Now, that's not about me, right? That's not about my ego or me getting to do stuff. But it's the fact I have the experience of going through this crisis, getting remade, understanding what that is, and then being able to give it to someone else. That's a real gift, and that's a privilege. And that is all part of that process. It kind of completes the circle there, so to speak. So it's great once you've got your foundation and built yourself up, but then lean into another because, oh, by the way, as I'm sure we'll get to, I did need those folks again in life when life took another turn and I did get, punched in the face again. So,
Yeah, and that's where you touched on that, your advocacy and your found purpose. You found purpose in your just advocacy for fathers with children with disabilities. Um, and you were touching on that. It kind of I had wrote some notes down here on that. But what are some of the biggest misconceptions about fatherhood in that context? How can dads be better supported in that journey?
yeah. So, it does go back to, first of all, dads understanding their identity in that sense, right? And, we have to realize that, in a healthy family and in a healthy relationship, you know, dad's role is much more than his job and his pocketbook. Some guys know that, some don't, or maybe some guys don't care to know it, and especially with disability, you see this because there are dads who legitimately don't want anything to do with their kids. If there's a disability there, there are a lot of dads who feel guilt and shame about I wish my kid was different, right? And they forget that kind of stuff. So it's a matter of getting back to realizing, hey, listen, your child is still a gift, right? And like in my kid's case, for example, my kid's never going to play sports, right? Now, I mean, it's just not in the cards for him. But he loves watching stuff on TV. He loves watching football. We can throw the football around. Likes watching basketball. When we used to have a hoop in the driveway, I'd shoot. Or, sometimes we go to the gym or whatever, and make some baskets. I take some shots, whether I make it or miss, he's still cheering because he thinks that's awesome, and we'll pass the ball to each other. And that's the extent of it, but that's okay because that's the relationship I have with my kid, right? And then, part of the advice that I also give too, that's really important. And I think that we learned this the hard way going through COVID was, there has to be a focus on self-care, meaning one of the big problems with families like mine, with the relationship with the parents is one parent, like in the way that I described my son's mom, carries the burden, of doing all this stuff. And then the husband says, yeah, well, I worked a 60-hour week. What do you want from me? Or, whatever that conversation is. But the reality is that when you are caring for your child, whether that's together or if mom's doing it on her own or dad's doing it on his own, each of you, because of everything you have going on, and especially if there's other, kids in the house, typical siblings and that kind of thing, you need time for yourself. You need time for yourself to restore and recharge, whatever that is for you. So one of the things that we learned, and we actually learned this from our marriage counselor years ago, was just having a calendar. And it sounds really simple and almost too simple, but the reality is that if you have a calendar, and not only for when the kids are going here or doing this, but okay, this is dad's night. He's going to go and, hang out with his buddies. He's going to go exercise. He's going to go, whatever, go to the men's group, whatever his thing is. Mom's going to go to yoga. Mom's going to work out. Mom's going to go see the ladies, her thing. They're going to spend that time recharging so that when they're with the child or kids with a disability, then they have enough in the tank to be able to, okay, now I'm restored, I'm refreshed, I'm not frazzled, I'm not stressed, I had my time, I had my, like I was, doing my thing yesterday, whatever. And then you also want to make sure you have time for each other. You got to have a date night on there, ideally once a week, and it doesn't have to be fancy. Okay, we're just going to hang out and watch a movie, fine. Or maybe you go out sometimes, whatever. But the reality is that you have to give yourself structure. Some people don't like structure because they feel it takes away their choice or spontaneity. There's a lot of freedom in structure because guess what? Here's what I learned. When it was my night, my wife couldn't come to me and say, well, you can't do that. Okay, but honey, it's on the calendar. Now we can negotiate it. We could say, okay, listen, we got something going on this week. Yeah, we could trade days, we could flip it, whatever. Not that happened all the time or should happen all the time, but the point was, this is my time. This is my space, right? And I need to be intentional with it. Now, if I just sit in front of a TV and veg out, okay, well, probably not the healthiest thing. But at the same time, I can't complain. Well, I didn't do anything with my time. It was your time, buddy. You had it. Okay. So use it wisely and make really take advantage of it, kind of a thing. So that was something that we learned. But again, it's prioritizing yourself in a healthy way, right? Because a lot of times we just say, well, if I get some time to do it, if I get time, that's how you get into this, this really bad rabbit hole of, okay, you know what? I've been with our kid now for 5-6 days straight. I am burned out. Now I'm angry at the child. I'm angry at the spouse. I'm angry at myself. I'm angry at anybody who walks through the door. That's, that's not worth it. Right. So give yourself that space and that opportunity. But again, me having that space also too then allowed me to do things of a creative nature with this advocacy work that I started doing, and allowed me to give back in that way. And so it was a healthy outlet, right, for me. So I really try to take advantage as much as possible. But whatever your thing is, do that thing, because if that makes you feel better, then you're better for everybody else.
Yeah, that's good advice, man. Dang good advice. You talked about a couple setbacks and one major one. It sounds like. Well, talk us through that and walk us through that major setback that came along.
Yeah. So when I described the hard season of life we went through years ago, now that's going back now over 10 years ago. My wife and I didn't separate at the time, and our marriage was kind of restored, and we were on pretty good footing. On Black Friday, now you can't make that up. On Black Friday, so the day after Thanksgiving in 2019, I was at home, and my son was out with some family friends, and my wife was, I thought she just ran out to see her mom or something. Came back in the house and out of nowhere handed me divorce papers.
Mm.
And basically, we weren't fighting. There was no animosity or anything on the surface. It was just, I don't love you anymore. Here you go. Now, that was a punch to the face, right? Because I didn't expect it. I didn't know where it came from.
You didn't see it coming, right?
No,
Yeah.
no, not at all. And and she cited some stuff from the past that maybe she felt like we never resolved, and I'm like, well, we've been in marriage counseling several years. I figured we kind of touched all the bases, and if something was a problem, you would bring it to me, but it didn't happen. So this is where the other part of that parking lot story comes in, because once I got those papers, I was floored, and I needed to get out of the house. Now she had left. So I was alone, but regardless, I'm like, I just can't stay here. I got to go somewhere. So I get in the car. I drive maybe, 10 minutes to like the local little shopping area kind of thing. I park in the lot, whatever. And just like that time, all those years ago in that church parking lot, I start to make phone calls. But this time, here was the difference. I had spent several years doing a bunch of work intentionally with a lot of special needs folks, dads I knew, professionals I knew. I had developed a lot of good, strong, healthy relationships through church and these other organizations and activities. So now I had people to call now that I was in real crisis again. So I had friends that were attorneys and had been through divorce and had special needs kids. And I had other special needs dads that had been divorced and understood it, and other friends that I could lean into for advice and support. I had such an outpouring of support now, whereas in the past I could barely find it. Now I had people who, whether they were divorced or not, or knew my wife or knew our family or knew my son, whatever, and people from all over the country. And again, I don't say that to show off, but I say it because when community is done well, that is really its whole purpose. Is, you know what, I'm going to do everything I can to help you when you need it, and when that day comes for me, hopefully you can be there for me. And you know what, I would say the vast majority of everyone that I had ever connected with was on some level, and that was amazing to me. But it also was exactly what I needed, because now I was facing, okay, now this is happening. Even though I tried to rectify it with my ex, she wasn't interested. So we did head to divorce, and I wound up dealing with in 2020, which I know was a hard year for everybody
Yeah.
because of what COVID did. But I was dealing with divorce. I was dealing with COVID. I was dealing with the death of a couple of close relatives, and my mother, who had to transition into assisted living. And oh, by the way, I'm an only child, so I was really the one who was carrying the brunt of that. So I had to do all of those things really over the course of several months in 2020, and that was a little bit. That was a little bit,
That's a
and again,
lot.
yeah. And you know what? 6 months prior, you would have told me that, I'd have been like, "You're crazy. What are you talking about?" Like, because most of us thought COVID would have been crazy 6 months before it happened, and same thing with, for me personally, all these other things in life. But that's when I needed my faith and I needed my community the most, and they were there for me. Does that mean it was easy? No. I had plenty of rough days. I had plenty of days I cried in my pillow. I had plenty of days I screamed, "Why God?" I had plenty of days where, I wasn't suicidal. I was not that, but it was also kind of a "how did I get here" kind of a thing. And there is a happy ending to the story, which is great. But the point of that moment was I learned what it meant to be a support, what it meant to be a friend, what it meant to give comfort to someone, and what that looks like again when you need it in that moment. So that proved to be so valuable for me, and so important in that sense. So when I speak about community, I say, hey, listen, I'm living proof that you can't do this alone, and especially with disability, you cannot do it alone. So go get you some people, go get you some community, because at the end of the day, it's something that we all need on some level.
Man, that's tale of two parking lots. Man, that is a really great way to frame that. And then the first parking lot, man, you're trying to find your keys, right? You don't have a light. The street light's out. And your second parking lot, man, you've assembled this group that is able to hang with you and stick with you, and you got plenty of light and plenty of hope inside of that second parking lot, as bad as it was. And listen, COVID was hard by itself, but people that may be listening to this, and hopefully we know some people that need to hear this, and we're sharing it. But he, some people, some folks just struggle with just basic. Got cut off in traffic. It's the worst day ever. Look at all those things, right? Of just how you stacked all those things that should have absolutely, been just a big detriment. But your network, all the things that you had assembled to help you get through that. Man, what an awesome, too cool.
Yeah, and you know what, it got me through that. And now again, life, it did mean life was totally easy or fixed. You know, my son's mom, my now ex-wife, we have a great relationship.
Good.
That's all good. We raise our son well. You know, I got myself back on some firm footing. And again, you know, it's still tough learning to do life differently when you see your son half the time, or when you know, your mom is living somewhere else. And quite honestly, my mom has pretty severe dementia right now. So, you know, it's not the same experience as, you know, it might have been 10, 20 years ago. But at the same time, you know, all those wonderful people are still there, as well as the fact that I did meet my new wife, that we just got married this year, as a matter of fact.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and you know, I actually met her through the organization that I work for, which is Johnny and Friends, which is a global Christian disability organization. She actually was a longtime volunteer. Our paths had never crossed, and then, you know, we just happened to cross paths last year, and then lo and behold, we, you know, wind up meeting on a dating app of all places, and then realizing, wow, we know each other. And then yeah, short time after that, we were married. So yeah, so we've been in the new marriage for about 6 months now. It is an absolute blessing, because what I also saw through meeting her and kind of seeing all of the interesting connections, because it turned out, as it turns out, we knew a lot of the same people. We had relationships with a lot of the same folks, and you know, had been to a lot of the same one specific place where my organization hosts retreats for families of disability in the summer. We do it up in Michigan. So we had both been to that same place many times. And it was one of these things where, like, wow, it was almost like um, when people say God takes, you know, whatever your pain is, and has a purpose for it and with it, and you know, create something new and wonderful. You know, I'm a living example of that, because you know, I never wanted to get divorced, and I always saw myself with my ex-wife. But at the same time, you know, however that happened, you know, there was something great down the road. I just needed to have the faith and the courage to keep pressing on to it. So
It's awesome. I saved this. I saved this last question. I was going to ask it kind of second, but I saved it after you shared something with me. And today's Christopher's birthday, and um, I'm not sure. I'll message you when I can get this thing out. So, Christopher, I apologize. I already teased my tomorrow episode. If not, this would go there, just for your birthday. But here's something that I think is really cool on Christopher's birthday. Um, what what are the most profound lessons that Christopher's taught you, and how's he shaped your perspective on life?
yeah, so that's the best one. So I will often say that my son has made me a kinder person. He's made me a more empathetic person. You know, I didn't have an experience of, you know, anybody with special needs or disability or anything prior to this. Even though I was a teacher, you know, I never taught in that area, kind of thing. So I was
Yeah.
certainly around those kids, but you know, it wasn't my thing. And nobody necessarily in my family either. So when my son was born, and he had it to the extent that he did, you know, I had to learn how to see him differently, and also all of these other folks. And now I had an experience of, you know, in that different way. But it was also an understanding of, okay, I have a son who, as I like to say, um, you know, he's a very active guy. He's involved in a lot of things in his community and YMCA and Special Olympics and all this stuff, but he doesn't have any friends. And this is a common challenge that most parents have with kids when there is a significant disability. They don't have any genuine friendships. They have the folks that they go to school with, or maybe that they see at whatever activity they do, but they don't have anybody calling them up on the weekend. Hey, what are you doing? Let's go out. Let's do this. Let's go here. Right. And he probably may never have that. Right. And being an only child as well. And I'm an only child. His mom's an only child. So, you know, my concern is, like a lot of our families, is what is his future going to be? Because whatever his living situation is, which is probably going to be some kind of like a supported environment, like an assisted living kind of a thing, um, okay, we can care for his life needs, right? Like sometimes people will say, you can pay someone to care for your kid, but you can't pay someone to love them, right? And that's where I also get hung up on community so much, because as I talk to people, and specifically in my job with Johnny and Friends, is I actually work with churches of any denomination and any size to support people with disabilities. What do we need to do for you? Do we need to create a program? Do we need to do a Sunday school? Do we need to make your building more accessible? Whatever it is. But the idea here is that someday, mom and dad are going to be gone. Most of the people that he knew growing up are going to be gone that cared for him. And he's not really going to have a lot of extended family, and he's not going to have siblings checking in on him. Who's going to be his family? Who's going to be his community? Who are going to be the people that say, I love you, happy birthday, Merry Christmas, whatever, right? That, and when I talk to churches, I say, look, this can be you. This can be something you could give back to families like mine, or whatever that community is. But the fact is that he has taught me what this is really like to walk a journey as a parent in this capacity, given these particular unique struggles and challenges, which at the end of the day, in many ways, turn out to be gifts. But for me, I know that I'm kinder, I'm more empathetic, I am just better with the world because I need the world to be better for him, right? I can't leave this world until I know it's better for him. And that's big for a parent to have to surrender, right?
Yeah.
But that's why we do this, and again, that's why I put so much stock into it, because someday that community, it's not going to be for me, it's going to be for him. And however much work we have to do to get it there, let's do that.
That's a purpose. Man, it's awesome. John, I can't thank you enough for just giving me a glimpse inside of your life and your story. And man, I hope to hear this in person, right? I hope someday to be able just to be in listen to you tell your story of two parking lots and live. That would be really cool. I think to really put a exclamation point on us just having this chance meeting together. So, connection wise, how would you like folks that are listening to this? How would you like for folks to connect with you if they would like to ask you any questions about your work and things that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I do have a website. So it's johnfella.com. You'll see most of my content on there. I have a ton of writing as a blog writer, and also doing a bunch of presentations, videos, podcasts just like this. You mentioned Tale of Two Parking Lots. I have actually done a couple of presentations of that at conferences, so people can find that too. You can find me on Facebook. I actually have a blog page on Facebook. It's John Special Needs Blog on Facebook, or just look up my name, John Fella. Feel free to reach out to me, connect with me, message me. I'm on Instagram at John Fella. It's actually John Fella1. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, X. Just look up my name, kind of a thing. One thing I did mention at the beginning of our interview, but just so everybody knows, a lot of my content is under my old last name, which is Felageller, Felageller. You can still find a lot of content under my new name, but my website isn't always most updated. So if you look under Felageller, you might find some of my other content that's not on the website. But either way, you can get to me.
We'll make sure I'll bookmark the majority of that. Folks, reach out for him. You know someone who's struggling in this situation, special needs child that John is standing by and can give some great advice to. So take him up on those offers to reach out for him with follow some advice. He's like me. If he can't help you, he's going to push you to someone that can. So thank you, John. I appreciate you being with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. It was great.